Hi everyone, this is the Consummate Shill, and what I have for you today is a fundamental look into the good, the bad, and everything in between in Kingdom Come Deliverance. So the game is close to a year and a half old now, and I picked it up recently and decided to throw a review together for it. A couple of things to note before we get started. This is the PC version of the game, and the review encompasses the base game only, as I haven't played any of the DLC content yet. The developer of this game is Warhorse Studios. They're a relatively small Czech company that formed in 2011, and Kingdom Come Deliverance is the dev's first and only title to date. We'll start with the story. The way Warhorse sets the scene, you begin to really see the story unfold. It grabs your attention. I mean, it's not often I find myself legitimately becoming emotionally involved in a game, but it's extremely easy to become engaged in this one. I won't go too far into the plot to avoid spoilers, but the game's set in 15th century Bohemia under the rule of the Holy Roman Empire. You play the role of Henry. You're a peasant son of a blacksmith living in Skalitz. The king at the time is a useless shit, so his half-brother, along with the help from some nobles, imprison the king and invade Bohemia. Some war atrocities, you could say, are committed in Skalitz, and that's where your story begins. Well, it's a really well-crafted story, has a lot of twists, turns, surprises along the way. It was really hard for me to take breaks from the main quest at times. I couldn't wait to see what the hell was going to happen next. Having said that, one of the biggest tips I could give you if you decide to play this game is to go off and explore. I mean, don't get tunnel vision and get caught up with trying to finish the story as fast as possible. I mean, that's the mode I was in the beginning, and it was a big mistake. Just go and do things off the beaten path. Literally anything you can think of, just go and do it. Anything that seems interesting to you, and really just be a part of the world. Now, the first big thing I want to touch on is one of the larger topics of discussion among players, because it's one that's caused many people to quit the game before they even got started. The combat in this game is a mortal son of a bitch. At least at first it is. There were several times in the beginning of the game where I felt completely helpless, no idea what the hell was going on. I was getting mauled by guys wearing rags, wielding clubs. It can feel daunting and make you just want to quit playing, but trust me, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Really, first-person melee games haven't resonated well with me in the past anyway, and this was no exception. I absolutely hated the combat system initially. You learn the basic concepts fairly easily, but applying them in a real fight without practice is going to be a disaster. The system uses sort of a 6-point directional attack wheel. You can imagine the wheel as a clock. You swing from roughly 8, 10, 12, 2, and 4 o'clock. There's also a point in the center of the wheel for thrusting and stabbing attacks. And you can use any of these multi-directional or stabbing attacks in any number of combinations. There are some preset combos you can get through perk points. More on that later on, but they do, extra animations and a little bit of extra damage. But the bulk of the combinations I used were just whatever felt good in the flow of combat. There's certain combos that work well against one type of enemy, be less effective against others. They're bows as well, but they can be, useful to launch surprise attacks, but I found the bow to be fairly boring in comparison to the melee combat. Defensively, positioning and timing are pretty important. You can choose to constantly hold your weapon or shield in a defensive blocking position, but this isn't very effective at all, really. To defend yourself properly, though, you're going to have to use the perfect block and evade techniques, and they require some patience and timing. Now, you're going to suck at fighting in this game. Really, really bad at first, but remember who you are in this world. You're a son of a blacksmith, peasant, weak, frail, fucking turd who can barely even swing a sword, much less be proficient with one. So you need practice, and practice a lot, and eventually you'll get better and better. Learning combat in this game will be daunting, to say the least, but trust me, you put a little time into it, and you'll be amazed at how intuitive and fun it actually is when you get the hang of it. The game is designed to challenge you and be very difficult at times, and there are no difficulty settings in the game at all. There's a video out there somewhere of the lead designer for this game, and he's at a developers conference, and he says, quote, "Difficulty options is not good. Don't use difficulty options. The player has no right to choose the difficulty. You are creating your game, and you will tell him how to play it." That may turn some people off, but it's a testament to the sort of game this is. You know, the game will not hold your hand, and it'll be punishing if you don't adapt and work toward figuring things out. I'd highly suggest sparring with Captain Bernard in the combat arena outside of Rete. It was invaluable when I was trying to figure out how to avoid getting my ass kicked repeatedly. One more thing to note about the combat is you won't comfortably be taking on multiple attackers in this game. If it's a 1-on-2 against some decently skilled, decently armored opponents, or 1-on-4 or 5 against a group of peasants with no armor, with some practice and a little bit of gear, you'll be fine. But and this will surely happen sooner or later in your playthrough. You'll come across 4 or 5 skilled and well-equipped attackers. Buckle up, because it's going to be complete chaos. 1 or 2 mistakes in a fight like that, and you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Originally I thought the difficulty in terms of being outnumbered was pretty overtuned, and the enemies wouldn't or shouldn't be that aggressive, but this game has really, for me, captured the essence of what I imagined it would feel like to fight 4 or 5 attackers at the same time. It would surely be a high-intensity fight for your life, and it should be hard to overcome odds like that. It's not like most other games where the enemies take turns attacking you, and you can wipe out 2 or 3 guys quickly, even the odds a little. It's all 4 or 5 of the guys you're fighting will be up your ass 100% of the fight. Being patient and defending yourself is the only way to survive. And once you've mastered the basics and you can start getting a little fancier, better with your combinations, holy shit, the fighting will go from you wanting to throw your PC out the window to you can't wait for your next opportunity to kick somebody's ass. It becomes very, very fun and rewarding later on.
No matter how good the plan is, something always gets f***ed up.
On to items. Statistically, items are divided into 3 main stats: slash, pierce, and blunt damage for weapons, and slash, pierce, and blunt defense for armor. It's a pretty straightforward, easy to understand system. It works just like it sounds. Each weapon has a set value for each type of damage, and its attack damage for each type of attack corresponds with those values. I'm not too familiar with how blunt weapons work, so I won't discuss them. I use longswords for 95% of my playthrough, and I preferred weapons with a pretty even balance between slash and pierce damage. I use both type of attacks pretty equally as a hybrid sort of slashing, stabbing combo, and it worked pretty well for me. Armor works in pretty much the same way. The higher the value, the slash, pierce, or blunt defense, the better that piece of armor is at defending those types of attacks. Now, durability and degradation of equipment play a huge role in the game. Each piece of equipment will have different maximum durability values, and those often correlate with how heavy that piece of equipment is. The durability stat works as sort of a dynamic trade-off where you decide between how fast and slow or how light and heavily armored your character will become. Heavy and highly durable equipment will last long and provide the best protection from attacks, but it will slow you down while sprinting and fighting and cause you to expend more stamina in combat. Alternatively, light and less durable equipment will degrade faster and protect you less from attacks, but allow you to run faster, use less stamina, and be quicker in combat. Now, some people hate being bothered with it, but like it or hate it, every piece of weapon or armor has these statistics, so it's very important that you be vigilant in maintaining and taking care of your gear, because your gear statistics will degrade over time as you lose durability, and the stat losses on severely damaged equipment can be pretty massive. It's a big deal. Now, there are perks that give you bonus buffs for both weapons and armor that you've repaired yourself to sort of incentivize you to maintain your gear on your own, which is nice. It's possible to just have vendors repair your stuff all the time, but to tell you the truth, using at least the grindstone to sharpen your weapons is really cool, and it kind of adds another little tidbit of immersion, and the buffs you get from the perks for sharpening your weapons yourself are actually really strong and beneficial. While we're on the topic of maintenance, you also have to maintain your appearance aesthetically and hygienically through the use of troughs and bathhouses throughout the world. So you don't have to, but if you choose not to clean yourself or your clothing, NPCs in the world are going to take notice because nobody likes a dirty, stinky bastard. And failing to do so sometimes will actually negatively affect your interactions with NPCs. As far as your inventory goes, there's nothing really new going on here. It's easy to use interface. I didn't really have any gripes with. It's nothing special. There's tabs for item categories, important information like the amount of that item you have, the weight, the trade value. It works fine. It's fine. As far as the trading goes, it's a pretty standard system as well. You loot what you can and you sell the shit you don't need. It's nothing groundbreaking. There's a haggling feature. It works okay. Certain stats and perks can make you better at haggling with vendors, and it can save you a good deal of money this way, especially if you're a cheap prick like me and you haggle every transaction, whether it be buying or selling. Now, your actual statistics, such as strength, agility, warfare, defense, swords, stealth, etc., give you a variety of different stat increases and bonuses per point you gain in them. But they also work as large categories that you level up to be able to activate, perks held within each main stat. Some stats like strength give you a perk point for every 2 strength points acquired. Agility gives a perk point within the agility category for every 4 points of agility acquired, and so on for all stats. It's all a little different at the rate you which earn points per stat. Statistics are leveled by partaking in that particular type of activity. For example, fighting levels your warfare, defending attacks levels your defense, fighting with swords levels your sword skill, for example. Furthermore, those 3 aren't mutually exclusive either, because in a fight you'll essentially be leveling all 3 of those stats simultaneously, because you'll be actively engaged in warfare, defending yourself, and using your sword. Perk points are sort of the bread and butter of how you're going to choose to play the game in the beginning, because you get a limited amount of them as you level your stats. It can range from anything like increased carrying capacity perks under strength all the way to unlocking longsword combos under swords. Just one more thing to add on perks. Early choices will matter when you don't have many points to spend, but as far as I know, eventually you can acquire most, if not all, the perks once you max out a stat category, which I've never done because, keep in mind, the majority of my stats were not maxed out by the end of my playthrough. Now, for those of you that were maybe sitting there asking yourselves, when is this idiot going to pull his head out of this game's ass? Well, here it is. All of the praise and love for this game is certainly warranted, but it's definitely not without its shortcomings. The save game mechanic they decided to use for this game is absolutely putrid fucking rot. With all the great immersive aspects of the game, they decided that every time you want to save, you have to sleep for an hour, no matter the time of day, no matter the situation. Sleep for an hour or don't save. Kiss my ass. I mean, to be fair, there are some autosaves at certain points in quests, and another way to save, you have to consume this drink called Savior Schnapps. It's expensive to buy, at least early on it's expensive, and it can be crafted at an alchemy bench with rare materials. I guess it's good they did give you an alternative to the sleep to save mechanic, if you're in a pinch, but largely the system can be a nightmare. It's just unintuitive. It doesn't really add anything special to the game. I never experienced losing more than around 15 to 20 minutes of gameplay to a death due to not saving, but I've heard some horror stories about people losing hours of gameplay because they forgot to visit a town to sleep and save. With the amount of cutscenes in this game and time it takes to do things, forgetting to save could be devastating, especially for people who don't have much time for games in the first place. It's like you can be so immersed in the game that hours can go by at a time. If you forget to go back to town to sleep or choose to pass on the schnapps, you could find yourself shit out of luck. I really think they could have come up with a better alternative here, and it wouldn't have taken that much thought. And now, on a lighter note, travel and exploration. Firstly, there's fog of war everywhere if you haven't explored on the map, which is pretty standard by now, all these types of games. Traveling in this game isn't unlike any other games in the genre. There's fast travel points you'll discover along the way that take time and energy to traverse between. However, and this is something I'm not a huge fan of, but your fast travel can be interrupted by random occurrences along the paths, whether it be a log in the road, which is usually accompanied by enemies, or just a band of enemies trying to dismount and kill you. And I don't really mind all that because that is a thing that could happen, but what I don't like is you have a choice to avoid the conflict, and it's an RNG roll whether or not you succeed in avoiding it. You also get a perk that improves your chances of avoiding conflict during fast travel too, and it makes it pretty trivial to avoid these problems on the road. I found myself voluntarily stopping for like the first 10 of these at the beginning of the game and then avoiding every single one of them afterward through my entire playthrough because they're the same every time. It's either a wayfarer with some useless shit to say, or it's a group of 5 guys trying to kick your ass. There's just not enough variety to the mechanic to make it interesting to me. My god, horseback riding in this game is done well. I've never rode a horse. Well, I've been on a horse in my life. Never rode a horse at any type of, decent speed, especially the speed you do in this game. So I could be wrong, but it does a really good job of giving you a sense of speed and rough ride when you're on the horse, especially when you're really moving. It's like the beauty of the game world really lends itself to horseback riding. Exploring the world and actually riding to your destination instead of using fast travel is really fun. It truly is a beautiful game world, and being on horseback really, I think, accentuates that. This is semi-spoiler. I'm sure you could have guessed at some point, but you acquire your first horse in the game by progressing through the main quest. After that, you'll have to save up to purchase better horses, but your first horse is still pretty good, and it'll be fine until you can buy a better one. Horses overall are pretty simple. The most important stats I've noticed on the horse... Yeah, there are stats on the horses. The most important ones are speed, carry capacity, and courage. Speed and carry capacity are pretty self-explanatory, but courage. Okay, a low courage stat on a horse could result in the horse being a little more skittish. It can buck you off if it gets spooked. Getting bucked off at the wrong time can have pretty bad consequences, but a higher courage stat will reduce the chances you get bucked greatly. I can't overstate how much I enjoy the horses in this game. I didn't even touch on the combat on horseback, but it's fun too. It can be very effective as well in certain situations. The horses are just done really well, and it just adds another immersive aspect to the game. And I know, immersion. You'll hear me say that word a good bit in this review, and maybe the term itself is largely overused, but I feel like it's an important aspect of an RPG. I'm not sure that I've ever felt more like a part of the story in an RPG as I did when playing this game. The greatest games I've ever played are always the ones where I look up at the clock and like 3 hours have gone by and it felt like 20 minutes or something. I think you truly have to be immersed in the content to get that type of feeling. More specifically on immersion, some examples, aside from the ones I've already mentioned, like, for instance, the townspeople, they wake up at dawn or shortly after. They go to work or whatever the hell it is they do that day. They'll break for lunch midday. A little later, they leave work. They may hit the bar on the way home. The shopkeepers close up shop. A little later, they go to bed, and they repeat the cycle a little differently every day. There's drunks that spend all their time at the taverns, beggars that set up in various places, people rush for canopies or run indoors when it's raining. Like, the towns are truly living, breathing examples of daily life, and you can really feel that. And there's always something going on out in the world. You come across beatings, killings, robberies, random fresh corpses laying on the ground, fights between guards and enemy soldiers, or guards and bandits, or whatnot. There's all kinds of shit going on when you're just exploring, riding around out in the world. If you come across a bandit camp out in the woods, you kill all of them, you loot them, loot the chest in the camp. You could come across that same bandit camp at another point in your playthrough. Days later, it'll still be empty, and that fucking chest will still be empty. Now, that may seem like a small, irrelevant detail, but it's the little things like this that make you feel like you're leaving your mark on the world. Now, bodies will disappear eventually, but it takes days, and really, it's a pretty plausible occurrence, considering anything outside of town was basically wilderness. And back to cleanliness, aside from being dirty and smelling like shit and that affecting NPCs, if you have blood on your clothes or blood on your sword, that will intimidate townspeople and or enemies you're fighting. Sometimes your enemies, or I say enemies, but sometimes it'll make others less likely to engage you if you look like you just filleted a few people before they come across you. This by no means is an all-inclusive list of what makes this game immersive. There's a few things off the top of my head. And I have to mention that one thing some of you may not care for in this game is the amount of cutscenes thrown at you. You could argue, I guess, that too much of anything you don't have control over in a game will kill the immersiveness. And that can be true, but I think cutscenes in this game are done pretty well. I mean, most of them are essential to the story and pretty entertaining. I enjoyed most all the cutscenes. There were times where, I was like, God, this seems like a little much here. But, overall, the cutscenes in the game are fantastic, I think, and definitely worth watching. There are a lot of them, though, and this is especially true in the beginning of the game. So, full disclosure, the game has a lot of cutscenes. I liked them. You may not like them. You can skip through them, though. That's I guess, the main point that I should have touched on. You don't have to watch them if you don't want to, but I would recommend it.
Get him! He'll never get...
There's some probably important skills that I haven't touched on. I chose to leave them out of the review because I didn't spend much time doing them. There's like alchemy, herbalism, hunting, pickpocketing, and they're, you may enjoy messing around with those, but they really didn't interest me, so I left them alone. As for skills I did use that I haven't discussed yet, lockpicking. Good Christ, I can't imagine a poorer implementation of a real-world skill than what Warhorse decided to do with lockpicking in this game. Picking locks is an interesting thing to do in a game like this, but the mini-game they decided to turn this into is neither fun nor accurate in any way to actually picking a lock. It's like they ran out of time on a deadline or something and had an intern construct a shitty flash game and just slapped it onto every lock in the game and forgot about it. It's a bigger part of the game than you may think, too. There's locked chests and boxes everywhere. I would love to hear the devs weigh in on why they put so little effort into something that's used so often in this game. It really can't be that hard to research lockpicking, or better yet, hire a locksmith to come in the office for a day or a half a day and come up with something creative to loosely resemble actually picking a fucking lock. Reading is another skill that I haven't mentioned yet, but it's implemented very well, I think. There's tons of books sold by random vendors throughout the world that when you read the books, you'll not only improve your reading stat, but other stats as well, depending on what the book's about. Like, for instance, a book about a particular war may improve your warfare stat. The interesting thing about how reading is implemented is instead of just using... I forgot to mention this also, there's a pastime function in the game where you can just pass by, X amount of hours, between 1 and 24 hours. However much time you want to pass by, you set it, hit the button, passes that much time. Anyway, instead of doing that, reading works sort of the same way. If you want to pass time from, say, 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., because you have to wait until dark for a quest you're on, something like that, instead, you can read a book for that amount of time. Improve your reading, gain important stats in addition to the reading, while passing that 4 hours instead of simply just skipping through time. Which is pretty nice. I like how they work that out. Now, bugs. Okay, no game I've ever played is perfect. Ever. There's never been a perfect game made. I don't care what anybody says. There's never been a single perfect game made. Ever. So, having said that, as far as the bugs go in this game, my first playthrough was between 50 and 60 hours. I didn't run into a single game-breaking bug. I know that's not true for many people. I've read some really bad stories about quests getting broke, people can't progress through the game. There are, some really bad bugs that affected them in very negative ways. But I played a more mature version of the game. I started playing in July 2019. Now, just because I didn't see anything that broke the game or quests I did in any way doesn't mean that there were no bugs in the game at all. I mean, there were plenty along the way, but none were so extreme that they affected my experience beyond, minor inconveniences or rare, silly graphical glitches here and there, stuff like that. The worst thing that happened to me was during a main story battle. Somehow, toward the end of the battle, I fell through the world and was stuck looking up at everyone fighting. The battle ended like 20 seconds or so after the bug occurred and went straight into a cutscene. And when everything picked back up, I was fine. There was no longer that bug. So I mean, I don't know if anybody else has experienced that, but that was probably the worst one that I've seen. And it ended up not really being a big deal at all for me. There were also minor things such as certain. In this one, I don't know. These really got to me. There were a few of these that I picked up on, but there were things like dialogue changes with certain characters. Say there are dialogue options A, B, and C. You choose to go all the way through conversation A. That conversation comes to an end with something like, yeah, hey, I'm sorry to hear your son was brutally killed like that. My condolences. And then you move down, start working through conversation B. And then they say something like, their family has fallen on hard times recently. They don't want to bother you with their problems, but then the character acts like the previous conversation never happened and goes on to tell you about the story of how their son was murdered again. It's just things like that. It's just kind of... It's not a huge deal, but it's just odd. And I'm not sure if you can call it a bug or an oversight or whatever, but those situations were always a bit annoying and redundant and kind of ruined those dialogues for me. Ultimately, though, when you get down to it, these things were very easy for me to forgive. I mean, none of these issues affected me for more than a minute or so, or just through one cycle of one character's dialogue, and certainly none of the issues that I ran into persisted through the game. I mean, also, every now and then I would get stuck on a spot on the floor, and 99% of the time, I say 99%, it didn't happen that often, but when the bug would happen, I would get stuck on the ground. It usually happened on a narrow walkway or a set of stairs. Again, annoying. It's not a huge deal. It's not going to keep you from progressing through the game. I think that's all I have on bugs. I'll just briefly touch on audio and graphics before I wrap this up. Let me start by saying the sound in this game is absolutely wonderful. It's one of the few games I've ever played that I left the game music on for the entirety of my playthrough. The orchestra that created the tracks for the game really did an excellent job. As far as sound effects, they're done wonderfully as well. The weapons smashing against armor, in particular, are fantastic. Other great audio that really stood out to me is the really bassy galloping horses, the ambient noises of the world, especially when you're out in the woods. It kind of just all comes together to create a really great listening experience. Graphically, the game truly is beautiful too. The landscapes, rolling hills, streams, distant towns and castles, they really make for an amazing looking world. I wasn't particularly wowed by any of the armor or weapons or character models, that kind of stuff, but they were going for realism in this game, if you ask me. If you want spectacularly, graphically stunning armor and weapons and badass looking characters, this game isn't it. I mean, I'm sure fashion was an afterthought in war times like this, and it's reflected in most of the armor in the game. This is a time where practicality was the order of the day. Aesthetically, they didn't give a shit what they looked like. Just a side note, I played the entire game with the HD sound and HD texture pack. I'm not sure how much of a difference that either edition made from the original sounds and textures, but I do know, and I will say, that my graphic and sound experience was pretty top-notch. Now, I figure I've about gone on long enough here, so to wrap this up, I just want to say I thoroughly enjoyed playing this game. I've never played anything quite like it, and to say that I was pleasantly surprised about how good it was would be an understatement. The state the game is in today is more than playable, and I would highly, highly recommend it to anyone even remotely interested in picking it up. Just give it a shot. Just remember to be patient and learn the combat and allow yourself to relax, explore. Just be a part of the world and let the story flow on its own. Don't rush it. Do not rush the game, because you're bound to miss the little things that make it so damn good. I hope you enjoyed the review, and hopefully you learned something today about Kingdom Come Deliverance. And like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more like it for other games. Also, let me know what you think about the review or what you think about the game in the comments. And thanks for watching.
Medic is bearing down on us with his band of goat f***ers. And if there's one thing we pride ourselves on in Talmberg, it's that we defend the honor of our goats.